Today, I want to look at the wilderness journey of the Israelites through the lens of Donald Winnicott. Winnicott was a British psychoanalyst and pediatrician, best known for ideas such as the holding environment, the good enough mother, transitional space, dependence, play, and the gradual development of a true self. At first, that may seem far away from the book of Exodus, but I think Winnicott gives us a remarkable way to read the wilderness. Because the Israelites, after leaving Egypt, are not yet free in the deepest sense. They have been liberated from Pharaoh, but they are still psychologically immature as people. They are anxious, dependent, hungry, frightened, angry, and frequently regressive. They leave Egypt, but Egypt has not yet left them. The wilderness becomes the place where a slave people must slowly become a covenant people, and that process is not instant. This is one of the great psychological truths of Exodus. Liberation is not the same as maturity. A person can leave an abusive relationship and still carry its patterns. A nation can leave oppression and still think like slaves. A child can leave infancy but still need holding. The Israelites crossed the sea, but almost immediately they complain. They fear thirst. They fear hunger. They remember Egypt strangely, even nostalgically. They say, were there no graves in Egypt? They speak of the flesh pots of Egypt. They wonder whether Moses has brought them out to die. From a moralistic perspective, we may judge them harshly. How can they complain after such miracles? How can they doubt after the plagues, the sea, the pillar of cloud and fire? But Winnicott might help us read them more compassionately. These are not mature adults calmly evaluating theology. They are a traumatized people emerging from generations of bondage. They do not yet have internal security. They do not yet know how to trust freedom. Their dependence has been shaped under slavery, not under love. This is where Winnicott's idea of holding becomes useful. For a baby to develop, it needs a holding environment. This does not mean perfect parenting. Winnicott famously spoke of the good enough mother, not flawless, but sufficiently reliable. The infant is held physically and emotionally until it can gradually tolerate separateness, frustration, and reality. Without enough holding, the self becomes anxious, false, fragmented, or defensive. Now imagine Israel as a newborn people. The Exodus is birth. Egypt is the womb and the prison. The Red Sea is the birth canal. The wilderness is infancy. Sinai is the beginning of moral structure. And the promised land is not reached until the people have passed through a long process of development. If we read this way, the wilderness is not merely punishment or delay. It is a transitional environment. The people must learn trust. They must learn that freedom involves uncertainty. They must learn that God is not Pharaoh. Pharaoh controlled through domination. God educates through covenants. But at first, the people do not know the difference. They experience need and panic. They are hungry. God gives manna. They are thirsty. Water comes from the rock. They are lost. A cloud and fire guide them. They are threatened. They are protected. This is holding, not indulgence, but sustaining presence. Manna is especially important. It comes daily. It cannot be hoarded except before the Sabbath. If people try to gather too much, it spoils. Psychologically, this is brilliant. The manna teaches trust one day at a time. A slave mentality wants hoarding because the future feels unsafe. Trauma says, gather everything now because tomorrow may betray you. But manna says, receive today's provisions today. You cannot control tomorrow by hoarding today's gifts. This is a difficult lesson. Many of us live with manna anxiety. We do not trust that tomorrow will provide. So we hoard money, approval, control, food, status, and emotional reassurance. We gather more than we can use because we do not feel held. The wilderness asks, can you live by daily trust? Not passive laziness, not irresponsibility, but trust. The Sabbath deepens the lesson. On the sixth day, a double portion may be gathered, and it does not spoil. The rhythm of manna teaches not only dependence, but sacred time. The people are not machines. They are not slaves producing bricks under Pharaoh. They must learn rest. This is psychologically revolutionary. Slavery destroys rhythm. Trauma destroys rest. Pharaoh says, more bricks, less straw, no stopping. God says, gather, receive, and rest. Winnicott would understand the importance of such rhythm. The holding environment is reliable. It allows the self to relax enough to become real. Now, let's consider the people's complaints. They complain again and again. From one angle, complaint is ingratitude. From another angle, complaint is primitive communication. A baby cries before it can explain. A traumatized person may rage before they can trust. A newly freed people may complain because they have not yet developed the language of mature faith. This does not mean every complaint is justified, but it means complaint may be part of development. The Psalms later will turn complaint into prayer. Lament becomes sacred speech. But in the wilderness, complaint is often raw, anxious, and demanding. The people are learning how to speak to God. They do not yet know how. There was also a fascinating dynamic around Moses. The people depend on him intensely. When he is present, they have a leader. When he disappears up Sinai, they panic and make the golden calf. This is deeply Winnicottian. The infant gradually develops the ability to be alone in the presence of the mother, and eventually to maintain an internal sense of the mother even when she is absent. But if that capacity is not developed, absence becomes catastrophe. When Moses is gone, the people cannot tolerate waiting. They demand something visible. Make us a God who will go before us. The golden calf is psychologically a failure of transitional space. The invisible God requires symbolic maturity. The people must trust what cannot be possessed, but they regress to something concrete, visible, manageable, and immediate. They want a God they can see, a God they can control, a God that will not disappear into cloud and mystery. Winnicott's idea of transitional objects may help here. A child may use a blanket, toy, or object to bridge the space between dependence and independence. The object is not simply an object, it carries emotional meaning. It helps the child survive absence. Religious symbols can function in a mature transitional way. A prayer shawl, mezuzah, candle, ark, or ritual object can mediate presence without replacing God. But the golden calf is different. It does not mediate the divine, it substitutes for the divine. It collapses symbol into idol. That is the danger. Healthy symbols open us to mystery. Idols close mystery down into possession. The wilderness education is therefore about symbolic maturity. Can the people live with an invisible God? Can they trust presence without controlling it? Can they move from infantile dependence to covenantal responsibility? This is not easy. Winnicott reminds us that maturity emerges gradually. The mother adapts almost completely to the infant at first, but then gradually fails in manageable ways. These small failures help the child adapt to reality. Perhaps the wilderness works similarly. At first, God dramatically rescues, feeds, waters, guides, but the people must slowly learn responsibility. Commandments, community order, justice, Sabbath, restraint, and memory. The goal is not permanent infancy under divine provision. The goal is a mature people capable of covenant. This helps us understand why the wilderness lasts so long. The people are not merely traveling through space, they are developing a self. A slave people must become a nation. A dependent people must become responsible. A frightened people must become capable of trust. A complaining people must become capable of prayer. A people who knew Pharaoh must learn God. That last phrase is crucial. Many people confuse God with Pharaoh. They imagine divine authority as domination, surveillance, punishment, and demand. But Exodus contrasts Pharaoh and God. Pharaoh takes, God gives. Pharaoh enslaves, God liberates. Pharaoh demands endless production, God commands Sabbath. Pharaoh kills children, God hears the cry of the oppressed. The wilderness is where Israel must learn the difference between oppressive authority and holding authority. This is a lesson many people still need. Some people reject God because the only authority they had known was Pharaoh-like, controlling, shaming, violent, manipulative. Winnicott's lens allows us to ask whether healthy spirituality must include a new experience of being held without being enslaved. The holding God does not infantilize forever. The holding God sustains growth. This has personal meaning too. Each of us has wilderness periods, times after a leaving and before an arriving, times when old structures are gone but new identity has not yet formed. A divorce, bereavement, career change, illness, spiritual crisis, migration, recovery from trauma. These are wilderness experiences. In such times, we may become anxious, dependent, irritable, regressive. We may long for Egypt, even if Egypt was destructive, because at least it was familiar. Winnicott helps us be gentle with that. Growth often includes regression. Freedom often includes fear. Maturity often begins with dependence rightly held. But the wilderness also asks us not to remain infants forever. Manna is given, but the people must gather it. Guidance is given, but they must walk. Law is given, but they must obey. The holding environment does not replace responsibility, it makes responsibility possible. That is the balance. Too little holding and the self collapses. Too much holding and the self never grows. The biblical God holds Israel in the wilderness, but also calls Israel into covenant. Perhaps that is why the wilderness remains such a powerful spiritual symbol. It is not only a place of lack, it is a place of formation. It is where the false self of slavery begins to fall away and the true self of covenant begins to emerge. Winnicott once wrote about the importance of being real. The true self is not merely compliant, it is alive, spontaneous, and capable of relationship. In Egypt, Israel could not be fully real. It was forced into the false self of slavery. Produce, obey, and survive. In the wilderness, Israel cries, complains, receives, rests, fails, repents, and learns. It is messy, but it is alive. And perhaps that is the journey of the soul. Out of Egypt, through the sea, into the wilderness, held by manna, taught by absence, tempted by idols, and called into covenant. Not yet home, but no longer enslaved. Winnicott helps us see that the wilderness is not just where Israel wanders, it is where Israel is held long enough to become real.